There are moments in human history when an individual's survival seems to defy all rational understanding. These are instances where eyewitness accounts speak of inexplicable events, leaving observers bewildered and unable to comprehend how they transpired. In the year 1847, on a secluded plantation in Georgia, a prosperous landowner named Baron Wilhelm Vannier conceived what he believed would be the ultimate form of retribution for a servant who had publicly humiliated him before esteemed guests. His scheme was straightforward, savage, and, he thought, foolproof: to confine the man within a reinforced enclosure alongside 6 of the estate's most ferocious bulls. These were beasts that had, in the preceding 2 years, fatally gored 3 men and exhibited a propensity to attack any moving entity. The Baron issued clear directives. The servant was to be held for 3 days without sustenance or water. His release was conditional upon his survival, a feat deemed virtually impossible, with survival for even 3 hours considered beyond hope. What unfolded thereafter became the most perplexing mystery in the county's annals. For when the enclosure was opened after 72 hours, the servant emerged entirely unscathed. Astonishingly, all 6 bulls followed him out, behaving as if they were docile canines, utterly refusing to leave his side. They became remarkably tame, even exhibiting a protective demeanor towards him. Within a fortnight, 14 additional bulls from neighboring estates began appearing at the plantation gates, exhibiting a similar placid and submissive disposition, their sole desire being proximity to this one man. 20 bulls in total, all seemingly transformed, now followed him. The Baron never again alluded to the incident. 3 months later, he was discovered deceased in his locked study, his visage contorted in an expression of profound terror. The servant, meanwhile, had vanished. On the very same night, he departed without any possessions, save for, according to 7 witnesses, a procession of 20 bulls that silently accompanied him into the obscurity of the Georgia woodlands. This narrative recounts the true events that transpired within that pen and the enduring enigma that has persisted to this day. Before we delve deeper into the remarkable account of Tobias and the 20 bulls that etched themselves into legend, allow me to pose a question. If you find yourself captivated by this exploration into one of history's most unsettling mysteries, please consider subscribing to our channel. We present such compelling stories on a weekly basis, narratives that skillfully navigate the boundaries between documented history and the inexplicable. Show your support by hitting the like button if you wish to see more content of this nature, and be sure to enable notifications so you never miss an upcoming episode. Now, let us return to Georgia in the year 1847 and uncover the truth of what transpired on Baron Vannier's plantation. The Georgia of the 1840s was a society where dominion was measured by land ownership and the availability of labor. The plantation system had reached its zenith, and men like Baron Wilhelm Vannier embodied the absolute power inherent in that era. Vannier was not indigenous to America. He had arrived from the Netherlands in 1829, possessing a considerable fortune amassed through the spice trade and a reputation for unyielding business practices that had brought him wealth but also widespread disdain within European circles. His transatlantic voyage was accompanied by whispers and rumors, tales of exploited laborers in Java, of maritime vessels that vanished with valuable cargo, and of business associates who met untimely ends just prior to significant transactions. While none of these accusations were ever substantiated, the pattern was sufficiently discernible that respectable Dutch society had quietly ostracized him. America, and particularly the American South, offered Vannier an environment that Europe could no longer provide. It was a place where inquiries into a man's past were considered impertinent, where affluence commanded greater respect than reputation, and where the prevailing social order permitted men of means to exert nearly unrestricted authority over those beneath them. He acquired an extensive estate near the town of Valdosta in southern Georgia, transforming it into one of the region's most lucrative cotton plantations. The property spanned nearly 3,000 acres of fertile agricultural land, bordered by dense pine forests to the east and the W with Lakuchi River to the west. Yet Vanier harbored an obsession beyond cotton, cattle, specifically bulls. This fascination had taken root during his sojourn in Spain, where he had witnessed bullfighting and become enthralled by the raw power and aggressive nature of these animals. He commenced importing European breeding stock, favoring breeds known for their ferocity and often employed in Spanish and Portuguese arenas. He perceived these animals as embodiments of strength and dominance, qualities he prized above all else. His collection of bulls rapidly acquired a fearsome reputation within the county, earning the somber moniker, the Devil's Herd, among the workers. These bulls were so belligerent that they had been responsible for the deaths of 3 men who had attempted to manage them. The initial fatality occurred in 1845. A laborer named Henry, who possessed prior experience with livestock from another plantation, was tasked with relocating one of the bulls to a different enclosure. The bull, a colossal grey specimen that Vanier had christened Titan, initially appeared docile. However, the moment Henry stepped into the pen with a lead rope, Titan charged. The assault was so swift and brutal that the onlookers were unable to intervene in time. By the time they managed to divert the bull's attention and extricate Henry's body, he was already deceased, his chest fatally crushed and several ribs fractured, piercing his lungs. The second casualty transpired 6 months later. A young man named Peter, not yet 20 years old, had been ordered to deliver feed to the bulls. He approached the pen with caution, sliding the provisions through a gap in the fence as instructed. However, one of the bulls, a black creature with prominent scars that Vanier referred to as Goliath, managed to thrust its head through the opening, entrapping Peter's arm in its powerful jaws. The bull exerted such force that Peter was violently pulled against the fence, his shoulder dislocating and his arm fracturing in 3 places. Other laborers rushed to his aid, but amidst the ensuing chaos, Peter lost his footing and struck his head against a fence post. He succumbed to his injuries 2 days later, never regaining consciousness. His arm was so severely mangled that the plantation physician opined that even if he had survived, the limb would have necessitated amputation. The third fatality proved to be the most harrowing. A man named Samuel, who had over 15 years of experience working with livestock and was considered one of the most skilled handlers on the property, was assigned to treat an injury sustained by one of the bulls. The animal had acquired a deep laceration on its leg, and Vanier insisted on its prompt treatment to prevent infection. Samuel approached the bull with great care, speaking to it in a soft tone and moving deliberately. He managed to get close enough to assess the wound. However, the instant he touched the bull's leg, the animal erupted in a violent frenzy. It reared up, its powerful hooves striking Samuel directly in the chest and head. Although the other workers succeeded in pulling Samuel free, he died within minutes, his skull fractured and blood flowing profusely from his ears and nose. Following Samuel's demise, Vanier ordered the pen reinforced with additional iron bars and more robust posts. He also issued a strict decree prohibiting any worker from entering the enclosure under any circumstances. The bulls were to be fed from the exterior via specially constructed chutes, and water was to be supplied through troughs accessible from a safe distance. The bulls were to remain confined within that pen, isolated and inherently dangerous, serving as a stark testament to Vanier's wealth and his capacity to maintain an entity that served no practical purpose beyond the ostentatious display of his power. The plantation itself operated as an insular world, home to over 200 individuals, the majority of whom were enslaved, their lives entirely dictated by Vanier's caprices. The principal residence was a grand edifice constructed in the Greek Revival architectural style, favoured by affluent southerners of the period. It featured imposing white columns, expansive verandas, and tall windows designed to capture any available breeze during the oppressive summer months. The house was situated on a slight elevation, strategically positioned so that Vanier could survey the entire plantation from his second-floor study, observing the cotton fields stretching towards the horizon, the orderly rows of worker dwellings, the numerous barns and storage structures, and, to the far east, the bullpen, a dark, ominous square against the tree line. Vanier ruled with a calculated form of cruelty. He disdained the act of personally flogging his slaves, deeming such behavior beneath his dignity and indicative of a loss of control. Instead, he employed an overseer named Dalton, a gaunt and severe man from South Carolina, renowned for his efficiency and his ruthlessness. Dalton was responsible for the physical enforcement of discipline, while Vanier meticulously orchestrated the psychological subjugation. He believed in creating exemplary instances in engineering situations where individuals would humiliate themselves or each other, thereby fostering an atmosphere of pervasive fear and uncertainty where no one could ever feel secure. For instance, he might announce his contemplation of granting freedom to a particular enslaved worker, then proceed to spend weeks having various individuals vie for this privilege through arduous tasks or challenging questions, cultivating hope, only to ultimately declare that none had proven sufficiently worthy. Alternatively, he would pit workers against one another, promising substantial rewards to whoever harvested the most cotton in a given week, only to subsequently devise reasons to disqualify the winner and bestow the reward upon someone else entirely. These elaborate games served no purpose other than his personal amusement and the unwavering maintenance of his absolute authority. His wife Margaret was a reserved woman hailing from a respectable Dutch lineage that had fallen upon hard times. Her marriage to Vanier was motivated more by necessity than affection. Her family required the financial security he could provide, and he sought the social legitimacy conferred by an alliance with an established European family. She dedicated most of her time to managing the household staff within the main residence, engrossed in reading and corresponding with relatives back in the Netherlands. She seldom discussed her husband's business dealings, and when she did, her remarks were always couched in the most general and diplomatic terms. Those privy to her personal life, such as her lady's maid, the cook, and a few of the house servants, shared hushed accounts of her profound unhappiness, her frequent solitary weeping in her private chambers, and a past attempt to depart that had been thwarted through either persuasion or veiled threats. The plantation's social hierarchy was intricate and rigorously maintained. At the apex resided Vanier and his wife, followed by a select echelon of white overseers and managers. Below them were skilled laborers, comprising both enslaved individuals and free black men employed for wages. At the lower strata were the field hands, and at the very base were those designated as troublemakers or those undergoing punishment. Mobility between these various tiers was exceptionally rare and entirely contingent upon Vanier's discretion. Among the enslaved population was a man named Tobias. The precise details of his age remained unknown, though he appeared to be in his early 30s, his eyes conveying a depth of experience far exceeding that. He had been acquired at an auction in Savannah 5 years prior, part of a contingent brought from a South Carolina plantation that had faced financial ruin due to a series of crop failures and ill-advised investments. The auction records identified him simply as Tobias, male, approximately 30 years of age, a field hand, with no known familial connections. However, those who had traveled with him from South Carolina offered a different perspective. They recounted that Tobias had always been distinct, even from their earliest recollections. He spoke infrequently, but when he did, his words carried significant weight. He possessed a peculiar gaze that unsettled those he looked upon, as if he could perceive beyond the facade they presented to the world and penetrate to something deeper within. Some of the other enslaved individuals from South Carolina asserted that Tobias had been born in Africa, brought over as a child, and retained memories of ancient customs, forgotten languages, and archaic beliefs. Others posited that he was born in America but had been tutored by someone possessing such knowledge. A select few whispered that he was not entirely human, but rather a different entity inhabiting a human form. However, such conjecture was swiftly silenced, as such talk was perilous, liable to result in accusations of practicing prohibited religions or planning insurrections. What all observers agreed upon was Tobias's extraordinary affinity with animals. Horses that were typically skittish and difficult to manage would become calm in his presence. Dogs that barked incessantly at others would sit quietly when he approached. Even wild creatures seemed to react to him in an unusual manner. Workers reported instances of him standing motionless in the fields while deer grazed nearby without fear, or of birds landing on his shoulders and arms as if he were a living tree. Upon purchasing Tobias, Vanier initially assigned him to field work. However, within a week, the stable master, an elderly free black man named Marcus, requested Tobias's reassignment to assist with the horses. Marcus had witnessed firsthand Tobias's calming influence on the animals and recognized its inherent value. Vanier, ever eager to maximize efficiency, consented, and Tobias was transferred to the stables. For 5 years, Tobias performed his duties with quiet competence, tending to the horses, maintaining the tack and equipment, and occasionally assisting with other livestock when required. He resided in a modest room adjoining the stable, separate from the communal worker quarters. This solitude suited him. He spent his evenings alone, and on Sundays, when the majority of the enslaved population congregated for the sanctioned religious services that Vanier permitted, believing that controlled religious observance fostered docility, Tobias would retreat into the woods, returning only after dusk. This behavior was viewed with suspicion by some. Dalton, the overseer, had interrogated Tobias on multiple occasions, demanding to know the purpose of his excursions into the woods. Tobias consistently offered the same reply: walking, contemplating, praying. These answers were insufficient grounds for punishment, as he was not violating any explicit rules, but it marked him as an individual to be closely observed. Marcus, the stable master, was one of the few individuals with whom Tobias engaged in regular conversation. Marcus, in his 60s, had been born into bondage, but had subsequently purchased his freedom 20 years prior through a combination of saved wages and a generous loan from a Quaker merchant who opposed slavery. He had chosen to remain in the South, working for wages and remitting funds to family members still enslaved, with the hope of eventually securing their liberation as well. He was a cautious man, adept at navigating the treacherous currents of Southern society without drawing undue attention. Marcus had made several attempts to elicit more information from Tobias, but Tobias remained guarded. The most Marcus had ever gleaned from him was a single, revealing conversation. Late one evening, as both men were tending to a horse suffering from a severe cough in the stable, Marcus remarked, "You possess a remarkable gift," observing as Tobias gently placed his hand on the horse's neck, its breathing gradually stabilizing. "I've spent my entire life with horses, and I've never encountered anyone with a touch like yours." Tobias remained silent for a considerable moment before quietly responding, It is not a gift. It is understanding. Understanding what? That they are not so different from us, Tobias replied. They experience fear, they feel pain, they desire security. If you comprehend this, truly comprehend it, they recognize it, they can discern it. Marcus nodded slowly. Where did you learn this? Tobias then met his gaze, and Marcus felt that familiar discomfort that others had described, the sensation of being profoundly seen by someone who understood it better than I do, Bias stated. Someone who is no longer with us. He offered no further elaboration, and Marcus did not press, but the conversation lingered with him. There was something about Tobias that seemed incongruous with the world they inhabited. He was too composed, too centered, too devoid of fear in an environment where fear served as the primary instrument of control. Vernier, too, had taken notice of Tobias's peculiar ability, though he interpreted it through a different lens. He viewed it as a valuable skill, something to be exploited. He had utilized Tobias on several occasions to manage particularly intractable livestock, always with remarkable success. However, he also regarded it with suspicion. Vernier harbored an aversion to anything he could not fully comprehend, and Tobias's influence over animals felt like something beyond ordinary expertise, hinting at a form of power that Vernier could not tolerate, the notion of anyone on his plantation possessing a power that did not originate directly from him. This unspoken tension had been building for 5 years, a palpable undercurrent. And then an incident occurred that would irrevocably alter the course of events. The incident that precipitated Tobias's severe punishment took place on a warm April evening in 1847. Vernier was hosting a dinner engagement for several prominent plantation owners from neighboring counties. Such gatherings were of paramount importance to him, serving as platforms to showcase his affluence, solidify his social standing, forge business connections, and cultivate political alliances. He had meticulously orchestrated this particular event for weeks, ensuring that every detail would be flawless. The guest list included some of the most influential men in southern Georgia. Among them were Colonel James Hartley, proprietor of a plantation twice the size of Vernier's and possessing influential ties to the state legislature; Richard Brennan, a wealthy merchant who held considerable sway over the region's cotton trade; and Thomas Fairfax, a distinguished lawyer who had successfully represented numerous plantation owners in contentious legal disputes concerning property and labor. Accompanying them were their wives, elegantly attired in expensive gowns, who would spend the evening engaged in discussions of fashion and social gossip, while the men deliberated on matters of business. The dinner itself was an extravagant affair. Vernier had instructed his cook, an enslaved woman named Ruth, who had received her culinary training in Charleston and was renowned for her expertise in French cuisine, to prepare a magnificent feast. This included roasted duck, venison, freshly caught fish from the river, vegetables harvested from the plantation's own gardens, imported wines, and elaborate desserts. The dining room had been adorned with fresh flowers and lit by numerous candles, the silverware polished to a brilliant sheen, and the crystal glasses meticulously arranged. The dinner proceeded splendidly. The cuisine was met with enthusiastic praise, the wine flowed freely, and the conversation was animated. Vernier presided at the head of the table, regaling his guests with anecdotes from his travels across Europe and Asia, making light-hearted jests at the expense of northern abolitionists, and discussing the latest political developments emanating from Washington. He was clearly in his element, performing for an audience that appreciated his considerable wealth and influence. Following the meal, as was customary, the gentlemen withdrew to Vernier's study for brandy and cigars, while the ladies remained in the parlor. It was during this interval that Vernier committed his fateful error. Having imbibed a substantial quantity of alcohol, He felt an expansive sense of confidence and decided to offer his guests a tour of his prized bulls. "Gentlemen," he declared, rising and gesturing towards the window, "I have something to reveal to you that I guarantee you have never before witnessed. The most magnificent and formidable bulls in all of Georgia, perhaps in all of America." The men, brandishing their brandy glasses, followed him outdoors, their laughter and conversation filling the warm evening air, which carried a gentle breeze perfumed with jasmine from the gardens. They traversed the grounds, passing the worker quarters where individuals observed silently from windows and doorways, proceeding past the cotton fields where the plants were just beginning to sprout their initial growth, and arriving at the eastern periphery of the estate where the bullpens stood. The enclosure was an imposing structure, engineered to contain animals that most men would hesitate to approach. The perimeter was fortified by thick wooden posts, each sunk 4 feet into the ground and further reinforced with iron bars. The spacing of these posts was sufficiently narrow to prevent even a determined bull from forcing its way through. The gate was equally formidable, constructed from heavy timber and secured with multiple iron chains and locks. Within the pen, measuring approximately 60 feet by 40 feet, 6 bulls moved about in the fading light. Vernier commenced describing each bull, pointing them out with palpable pride. "That one there, the grey beast," he indicated, "that is Titan, imported from Spain. He tragically ended a man's life in 1845, crushing his chest as if it were made of mere paper. And that black one, the one bearing scars, that is Goliath, of Portuguese lineage, responsible for 2 fatalities. The others are equally perilous. They are kept here as a testament to the true essence of power. Might unsoftened by compassion, absolute dominion," the attendees observed, a murmur of approval circulating, though a palpable unease settled upon several. These were men familiar with the harsh realities of conflict and control. Yet, the notion of harboring such formidable creatures with no practical utility beyond mere spectacle felt inherently disquieting. As Vandermeer continued his discourse, Goliath, the colossal bull, began to betray signs of mounting distress. The immense black bovine started scraping the earth with its forefoot, emitting guttural snorts and tossing its formidable head. It then launched itself at the enclosure, impacting the barrier with immense force. The collision was so jarring that the entire structure quivered, prompting an instinctive step backward from numerous guests. Vandermeer chuckled, clearly relishing their reaction. "Fear not, gentlemen, the barrier is robust. These beasts can hurl themselves against it with abandon throughout the day, and they will not breach its integrity. It was constructed specifically to contain them." Goliath charged once more. And this time, the other bulls joined the fray, all of them surging toward the fence, their roars echoing with fury. The cacophony was overwhelming, a symphony of animalistic rage that reverberated across the plantation grounds. The guests' smiles had vanished. Even Vandermeer exhibited a flicker of apprehension, though he attempted to mask it. "They are more unsettled than usual," he declared, amplifying his voice to overcome the din. "Perhaps the presence of so many individuals is agitating them." And then, as if summoned, Tobias appeared. He had been occupied in the stables, situated approximately 50 yards from the bull enclosure. He had detected the disturbance and ventured out to ascertain its cause, suspecting perhaps a horse had been startled by the noise. He carried a pail of feed, his work attire smudged with dust, his expression impassive. The instant Tobias entered within 20 feet of the pen, everything shifted. The bulls ceased their aggression, not gradually, not tentatively. They simply stopped as if an invisible switch had been flipped. Goliath, who had been in mid-charge, arrested its momentum, planting its hooves firmly, and remained utterly motionless. The other bulls mirrored this abrupt stillness. The bellowing subsided. The sole audible sound was the evening breeze rustling through the pine trees. The ensuing silence was more unnerving than the preceding uproar. All 6 bulls turned to face Tobias. They did not advance towards him, nor did they display any indication of hostility. They simply stood there, observing him with an intensity that could only be described as focused attention. Their breathing deepened, their bodies visibly relaxed. It was as though they had forgotten the fence, forgotten the men observing from the other side, forgotten everything save for the singular presence of this individual. Vandermeer regarded Tobias, his countenance darkening. The guests exchanged glances between Tobias and the bulls, a mixture of bewilderment and fascination on their faces. Colonel Hartley, having imbibed a considerable quantity of brandy and emboldened by it, emitted a nervous laugh. "Well, Baron, it appears your bondsman possesses greater command over your bulls than you do. Perhaps you should delegate the tour to him instead." This was intended as a jest, a light-hearted remark to dissipate the palpable tension. However, the moment the words left Hartley's lips, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Vandermeer's expression transformed from confusion to a chilling darkness. Humiliation mingled with incandescent rage. The other guests fell silent, sensing immediately that a grave misstep had occurred. Vandermeer slowly turned to address Hartley. "Is that so?" he inquired, his voice soft, yet imbued with a razor's edge that sent shivers through everyone present. Hartley, comprehending his error, attempted to retract. "I meant no offense, Baron. I was merely remarking upon the remarkable influence your man seems to exert over the animals. It is quite impressive, truly." But the damage was irrevocably done. Vandermeer had been publicly humiliated before his peers. His authority had been challenged, his power diminished, and this indignity had been inflicted by a slave, an individual deemed beneath consideration. This was utterly unacceptable. Vandermeer's gaze shifted to Tobias, who stood frozen, comprehending instantly that a dire chain of events had been set in motion. Tobias's face remained impassive, but his eyes betrayed a fleeting emotion, not precisely fear, but a recognition. He understood what was imminent. "Tobias," Vandermeer proclaimed, his voice carrying across the expanse, separating them. "Approach." Tobias set down his pail and advanced deliberately toward the assembled gentlemen. He kept his gaze lowered, his posture deferential, playing the expected role. Yet all who observed sensed that this was an artifice, that beneath the veneer, Tobias was far more than he appeared. Upon reaching the fence, Vandermeer scrutinized him for a protracted moment. The bulls remained placid, their attention fixed on Tobias, disregarding all else. "You possess a remarkable affinity for animals," Vandermeer stated, not as a question. "I work with them, sir," Tobias replied softly. "I have come to understand their nature." "Understand their nature," Vandermeer echoed, his tone laced with mockery. "How remarkably humble. Colonel Hartley here believes you wield more authority over my bulls than I do. What are your thoughts on that assertion?" Tobias remained silent. There was no opportune response to such a query. Vandermeer smiled, but the expression failed to reach his eyes. "I propose we test that theory. Let us ascertain the true extent of your control." The guests shifted uncomfortably. They could sense the direction this conversation was heading, and none of them relished it. "Baron," Thomas Fairfax interjected cautiously, "perhaps we should retire to the house. The evening grows late and this—" "Nonsense," Vandermeer interrupted. "The evening is just beginning to become intriguing. Gentlemen, I intend to propose a wager with my bondsman here. A rather substantial wager, I might add." He turned back to Tobias. "Here is my offer. You shall spend 3 days within that enclosure with those bulls. 3 full days without sustenance, without hydration, without shelter. Should you prevail, I shall bestow upon you your freedom and present you with $50. That sum represents more wealth than most free men ever see in a year. You will be at liberty to journey wherever you please, to pursue whatever endeavors you desire. You shall be a free man." The guests were rendered speechless, aghast at the proposal. $50 was indeed a considerable fortune, and the promise of liberty was an aspiration any enslaved individual would fervently cherish. However, the cost was almost certainly death. Everyone present had heard accounts of Vandermeer's bulls. 3 men had already perished. The notion that anyone could endure 3 days confined with such beasts was patently absurd. "And if I decline?" Tobias inquired softly. Vandermeer's smile broadened. "Then I shall assume your claims of possessing a gift are unfounded, that you are nothing extraordinary, merely another slave who experienced a fortunate turn of events on occasion. In such a case, I shall arrange for your sale to a plantation in Alabama. I am informed their labor demands are exceptionally strenuous there, far exceeding my own. You would likely not survive a year." It was a trap, and everyone recognized it as such. If Tobias refused, he would face reprition. If he accepted, he would almost assuredly perish. Yet a third possibility existed, one Vandermeer had not anticipated. Tobias might actually survive, and if he did, Vandermeer would be compelled to uphold his word in the presence of witnesses, lest he forfeit his standing among his peers. Tobias gazed at the bulls, still calmly positioned within the pen, their unwavering attention fixed upon him. He then looked back at Vandermeer. "I accept," he declared. Vandermeer's smile faltered momentarily, as though Tobias's ready agreement had caught him by surprise, but he quickly regained his composure. "Excellent. We shall commence at dawn tomorrow. I wish for every individual on the plantation to bear witness to this event. It shall be an educational spectacle." The guests returned to the main house in silence. The evening's planned amusement had taken a somber turn, leaving them all profoundly unsettled by what they had just observed, yet none felt compelled to intervene. This was Vandermeer's domain, his possession, his prerogative. To interfere would be to challenge his authority, a boundary none were prepared to cross. That night, word of the impending event disseminated rapidly throughout the plantation. Workers congregated in hushed groups exchanging whispers and speculations. Some lauded Tobias's bravery, while others deemed him foolhardy. A select few harbored a faint belief in his potential survival, though they could offer no logical explanation for this conviction. Marcus, the master of the stables, sought out Tobias in his quarters adjacent to the stable. "You are not obligated to undertake this," Marcus stated. "We can devise a means of facilitating your escape. There are individuals who aid those seeking refuge. I possess names, locations." "No," Tobias replied calmly. "Fleeing would only exacerbate my predicament and that of everyone else here. Vandermeer would vent his displeasure upon all of you." "But those bulls," Tobias continued. "I have understood since my arrival here that something of this nature was inevitable. Men like Vandermeer cannot tolerate that which they do not comprehend, and they are particularly intolerant of anything that diminishes their perceived strength. Marcus sank onto a wooden crate, his expression weary.
So you intend to walk into that enclosure and meet your end? Tobias met his gaze, and Marcus discerned an undefinable quality in his eyes. Not apprehension, not resignation, but something else entirely, something akin to absolute certainty. "I shall walk into that enclosure," Tobias stated quietly. "What transpires thereafter? We shall observe." The following morning dawned under a pallid sky, clouds obscuring the sun, the air thick with the premonition of rain.
Vandermeer had decreed that the entirety of the plantation populace was to assemble near the bull enclosure. This was to be a public spectacle, a blatant demonstration of his authority, and a stark warning to any who might contemplate defiance. Over 200 individuals formed a loose semicircle around the pen. The enslaved workers stood in clusters, their faces carefully neutral, acutely aware that any display of emotion could be interpreted as sympathy for Tobias and incur severe repercussions. The overseers and estate managers positioned themselves closer to the enclosure, armed with firearms and whips, prepared to intervene should the bulls somehow breach the containment. Vandermeer's personal manservant remained near the main residence, observing from a distance. Even Margaret had emerged, standing on the veranda with her personal attendant, her countenance ashen. Vandermeer himself stood directly before the enclosure's gate, attired in his most formal garments, as if presiding over a ceremonial occasion. Adjacent to him stood Dalton, in possession of the gate's keys. Several of the previous evening's guests had remained overnight and stood nearby, their discomfort evident, but their reluctance to depart equally apparent. To leave now would be to insult Vandermeer, a transgression none could afford. Tobias was escorted forward by 2 overseers. He wore the same simple work clothes from the prior evening, canvas trousers, a coarse cotton shirt, and worn boots. His hands were unbound. He surveyed the enclosure, the bulls pacing restlessly within, then turned his attention to Vandermeer. 3 days, Vandermeer announced loudly, his voice resonating across the assembled throng. 72 hours. If you survive, you depart with your freedom and $50. If you perish, he shrugged, well, you should have exercised greater caution around my bulls. A few overseers emitted forced, uneasy laughter. The majority of the crowd remained in somber silence. Vandermeer gestured to Dalton, who stepped forward and began unlocking the gate. The clang of the chains as they were removed echoed sharply in the morning stillness. The gate swung open with a creak of its hinges. "Enter!" Vandermeer commanded. Tobias moved forward without hesitation. He stepped through the opening into the pen, his movements measured and deliberate. The instant he was inside, Dalton swung the gate shut and re-secured it, the chains rattling back into place. For the initial few minutes, an unnerving stillness prevailed. The bulls, which had been circulating within the pen, ceased their movement and turned to observe Tobias. He stood near the center of the enclosure, motionless, barely breathing. His eyes were closed, his hands hanging loosely at his sides. He appeared as a man engaged in prayer or deep contemplation, utterly serene. The crowd watched in rapt silence. Some held their breath, others whispered prayers. A few of the children brought to witness the event began to cry, their parents hastily quieting them. Then Goliath, the formidable black bull responsible for 2 fatalities, began to stir. It lowered its massive head, pawing at the ground, its muscles tensing. Every observer recognized the ominous signs. The bull was preparing to charge. Several individuals in the crowd gasped audibly. One woman emitted a scream. Vandermeer leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Tobias, a faint smile playing on his lips. Goliath charged. The bull surged forward with terrifying velocity, its hooves thundering against the packed earth, its head lowered, its horns aimed directly at Tobias. It covered the distance in mere seconds, and for an instant it seemed a certainty that Tobias would be impaled, trampled, and instantly killed. But then, just as Goliath was about to make contact, Tobias opened his eyes. He raised one hand, palm extended, and uttered a sound. Not quite a word, not precisely a song, but something in between. It was low and resonant, seeming to emanate from the depths of his chest, and it carried across the pen with an uncanny clarity. Goliath stopped. The bull's momentum should have carried it forward.
It should have been physically impossible for an animal of that magnitude moving at such speed to halt so abruptly. Yet Goliath planted its hooves and stood perfectly still, mere 3 feet from Tobias, breathing heavily, its dark, liquid eyes fixed upon him. The crowd erupted in exclamations of astonished disbelief. Vandermeer's smile vanished. He took a step closer to the fence, his hands gripping the iron bars. The other 5 bulls approached slowly, forming a loose circle around Tobias and Goliath.
They did not charge. They did not threaten. They simply moved nearer, their heads bowed, their gazes locked on to Tobias. Tobias remained there for a considerable duration, his hand still outstretched, that peculiar sound still emanating from him. Then slowly he lowered his hand and took a single step towards Goliath. The bull remained stationary. Tobias advanced another step, and then another, until he was standing directly before the colossal animal. He reached out and placed his hand upon Goliath's forehead, precisely between the bull's eyes. The effect was immediate and profound. Goliath's entire frame appeared to relax. The tension drained from its powerful muscles, its breathing deepened and slowed. The bull closed its eyes, leaning almost imperceptibly into Tobias's touch, much like a domesticated animal seeking affection. The other bulls drew closer, encircling Tobias in a tight formation, but their movements lacked any aggression. They were calm, almost gentle, their massive bodies shifting with careful precision to avoid contact with each other or with Tobias. Vandermeer stared at the scene, his face pale, his jaw clenched. This was not the outcome he had foreseen. This was not what was supposed to transpire. The bulls were meant to dispatch Tobias within hours, if not minutes. Instead, they were behaving as though they were pets, like docile creatures who had known Tobias their entire existence. "Give it time," Vandermeer muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "They will turn on him when he sleeps, when he displays vulnerability. They will kill him then." But as the hours elapsed, it became increasingly evident that this was not going to occur. Tobias remained in the center of the pen, sometimes standing, sometimes seated, cross-legged on the ground, occasionally walking slowly in small, measured circles. The bulls stayed in close proximity, maintaining a respectful distance of a few feet, never straying. They exhibited no signs of aggression. They did not charge the fence. They did not engage in conflict amongst themselves. They simply coexisted within that space alongside Tobias, calm and focused. By midday, most of the crowd had dispersed, returning to their duties. Vandermeer had issued instructions for continuous observation of the pen, and workers took turns on guard, reporting their observations, though there was little to report. Tobias and the bulls remained in their peculiar tableau for hour after hour, as the sun traversed the sky. Vandermeer visited the enclosure on 3 separate occasions that first day, standing at the fence, his gaze fixed upon Tobias, his expression growing progressively darker. He remained silent, merely observing, his hands clenched so tightly on the iron bars that his knuckles turned white. That night, as darkness enveloped the plantation, lanterns were illuminated around the pen to enable the guards to maintain their vigil. Tobias finally sat down, settling himself in the center of the enclosure, his back straight and his legs crossed. The bulls, one by one, lay down around him in a circle, their immense bodies forming a protective barrier between Tobias and the fence. They positioned themselves with their heads facing outward, resembling sentinels on watch. The workers who witnessed this phenomenon relayed their account to Vandermeer, who came to observe it firsthand. He stood by the fence for over an hour, observing Tobias sitting motionless within the circle of bulls, his eyes closed, his breathing slow and steady. The bulls did not sleep, or if they did, it was in shifts, as at least 2 or 3 always remained with their eyes open, scanning the darkness beyond the fence. Vandermeer eventually turned and retreated to the main house without uttering a word. However, those who glimpsed his countenance reported that he appeared as a man who had witnessed something that irrevocably shattered his comprehension of the world. The second day commenced with a persistent drizzle, not a torrential downpour, but a steady rain that transformed the ground within the pen into mud and cast a pervasive greyness over everything. The workers arriving to observe anticipated finding Tobias suffering from exposure, cold and exhaustion from a night without rest. However, upon reaching the pen, they encountered something entirely different. Tobias stood in the center of the enclosure, his face upturned towards the sky, his arms spread slightly as if embracing the rain. The bulls formed a protective circle around him, their bodies effectively shielding him from most of the wind, creating a makeshift shelter. And Tobias appeared serene, not in distress, not struggling, but at peace, as if the rain, the chill, and the absence of food and water were inconsequential to him. One of the workers, a young woman named Sarah employed in the main house, later recounted to others that observing Tobias in that moment had brought her to tears, though she could not articulate the reason. He seemed free, she stated, even confined within that pen, even surrounded by those beasts, he appeared more liberated than any of us have ever been. As the morning progressed, a peculiar development began to unfold. The bulls started moving in discernible patterns, not erratically, but in deliberate, coordinated formations. They would ambulate in a slow circle around Tobias, all moving in the same direction, their steps synchronized. They would then halt, remain still for several minutes, and recommence their rhythmic progression. It bore a striking resemblance to a dance or a ritual. The observing workers were disturbed by this spectacle. It was too organized, too purposeful. Bulls were not meant to behave in such a manner. They were expected to be aggressive, unpredictable, and dangerous. Yet these bulls moved with the precision of seasoned performers. The only conceivable explanation offered was that Tobias was somehow orchestrating their actions. However, he exhibited no visible cues. He neither spoke nor gestured. He simply stood there, and the bulls responded to something imperceptible to anyone else. Vandermeer arrived at the pen around noon, accompanied by Dalton and 2 other overseers. He appeared profoundly sleep-deprived, his attire disheveled, his hair unkempt, his eyes bloodshot. He stood at the fence, fixated on Tobias and the bulls, his expression a complex admixture of fury and something akin to fear or bewilderment. "How is this possible?" he muttered. "How is he accomplishing this?" Dalton, standing beside him, shook his head. "I cannot say, sir. I have never witnessed anything of this nature. Those bulls are not behaving naturally. It's as though they are ensnared by some enchantment. Vandermeer turned sharply to confront him. Enchantment? Are you suggesting sorcery? Dalton appeared visibly uncomfortable. I am not suggesting anything, sir. I am merely stating that this behavior is unnatural. Bulls do not act this way, not without extensive training. Vandermeer turned back to the pen. There must be an explanation, a rational explanation. He is employing some technique, some method of control, perhaps auditory signals beyond our perception, or movements we are not detecting. There has to be a reason. As the daylight hours stretched on, the nature of this unsettling occurrence remained a profound mystery. Tobias persisted in his peculiar vigil, and the bulls continued their extraordinary deportment, leaving all observers in a state of deepening disquiet. Later that afternoon, an even more astonishing event unfolded. One of the bulls, distinguished by its scarred hide and identified by Vandermeer as Brutus, approached Tobias. The massive animal lowered its head until its forehead rested against Tobias's chest. Tobias gently placed both hands upon the bull's head and remained in this posture for close to an hour, utterly immobile. Those among the workers who bore witness reported that during this period, Tobias and Brutus appeared to be breathing in perfect unison. They inhaled as one, exhaled as one, their chests rising and falling with an identical cadence. Furthermore, the other bulls had completely ceased their movement. They stood frozen like sculpted figures, their gazes fixed upon Tobias and Brutus, as if observing something of immense spiritual significance. When the hour concluded, Tobias removed his hands from the bull's head. Brutus stepped back, gave its head a single shake, and then rejoined the circle. The remaining bulls resumed their deliberate, patterned pacing, and Tobias sank to the damp earth, settling cross-legged. His eyes were closed, and the persistent rain continued to fall upon his upturned face. By the onset of evening on the second day, news of the unfolding events had transcended the confines of the plantation. Individuals from adjacent estates began to arrive, seeking permission to observe the remarkable spectacle. Vandermeer, who typically would have welcomed such publicity, instead issued an order to secure the gates and station guards to prevent unauthorized entry. He had no desire for additional observers, nor for this extraordinary account to disseminate further than it already had. However, narratives possess an innate propensity for propagation, irrespective of individual wishes. The laborers on Vandermeer's plantation shared their experiences with family and friends on other properties, and the stories circulated. Merchants and transient traders, overhearing these accounts, carried them onward to neighboring towns. Within a few days, the tale of the enslaved man who had endured 3 days within a confinement with 6 formidable bulls was being recounted in saloons, houses of worship, and general stores across the breadth of southern Georgia. Some renditions of the narrative depicted Tobias as a figure of saintliness, divinely endowed with the capacity to pacify savage creatures. Other versions portrayed him as a more ominous entity, a practitioner of arcane African arts, one who had forged pacts with spectral beings or malevolent spirits. A select few asserted he was a prophet dispatched to convey a message concerning the injustices of servitude. Conversely, others maintained he was merely a highly adept animal handler who had experienced a fortunate outcome. Yet all agreed upon the fundamental facts. Tobias was alive, the bulls remained docile, and an inexplicable phenomenon was transpiring within that enclosure. On the evening of the second day, Vandermeer retreated to his study, where he commenced heavy drinking. His wife, Margaret, made an attempt to converse with him, but he brusquely dismissed her. The domestic staff reported overhearing him speaking aloud to himself, his voice fluctuating between anger and supplication, as if engaged in a dispute with an unseen presence. Approximately at midnight, a young domestic named Daniel, whose duty it was to maintain the fires throughout the residence, passed by Vandermeer's study. He heard the master shouting. Daniel paused to listen and subsequently recounted to others what he had overheard. Vandermeer was repeating, "It's not possible. It's not possible." Over and over, Daniel confirmed. Then he uttered something concerning the bulls belonging to him, asserting ownership and control over them. Following this, he declared, "He's taking them from me. He's taking everything from me." Daniel noted that Vandermeer sounded fearful, an emotion he had never before perceived in the Baron. The third day broke with clear skies and bright sunshine, the rain having subsided during the night. The ground within the enclosure remained sodden and muddy, and Tobias was covered in it from head to toe. His attire, his skin, his hair, all bore the marks of the earth, yet he did not appear weakened. On the contrary, he seemed invigorated. His eyes were clear and keenly focused. When he rose and stretched, his movements were fluid and controlled, as if he had just emerged from a period of restorative slumber rather than having spent 72 hours without sustenance or hydration, exposed to the elements and surrounded by perilous beasts. The bulls too exhibited renewed vigor. They moved with evident purpose, their earlier sluggishness replaced by a distinct and vibrant alertness. They continued their rhythmic pacing, their synchronized ambulation, but now an element of palpable joy permeated their actions, as though they were celebrating a momentous occasion. Vandermeer arrived at the enclosure shortly after dawn, accompanied by a contingent of nearly a dozen overseers and armed laborers. He presented a disheveled appearance, his face gaunt, his eyes sunken, his hands betraying a slight tremor. It was evident he had not slept. He stood by the fence, his gaze fixed upon Tobias, and for a considerable duration neither man uttered a word. Finally, Vandermeer spoke, his voice strained. "How are you accomplishing this?" Tobias met his gaze with composure. "I am not accomplishing anything. I am merely present." "That is not a satisfactory response," Vandermeer retorted sharply. "Those bulls should have eradicated you. They have already claimed 3 lives. They are inherently dangerous, unpredictable, and violent. But they are treating me as if they trust me," Tobias suggested quietly. Vandermeer's countenance contorted with rage. "You are employing some subterfuge, some specialized technique. Disclose it to me." Tobias remained silent for a moment, then replied, "There is no subterfuge. I simply comprehend them and they comprehend me." "That is impossible, is it?" Tobias inquired. "Or is it merely something you have never bothered to ascertain?" The remark struck Vandermeer with the force of a physical blow. His face drained of color, then flushed crimson with indignation. "You presume to address me in such a manner? You are a slave, you are chattel, you are inconsequential." Tobias held his gaze with unwavering resolve. "If I am inconsequential, then why do you exhibit such apprehension regarding the events transpiring here?" Vandermeer opened his mouth to respond, but no sound emerged. He stood there, trembling with fury and something more profound, the growing fear that had taken root within him since this entire ordeal commenced. At length, he turned and departed without another word, leaving the overseers in an awkward state of inaction by the fence. As the morning progressed, a truly unprecedented phenomenon began to manifest. Workers positioned at the eastern perimeter of the plantation, near the boundary of the adjacent property, reported hearing peculiar sounds. These were the bellows of bulls, yet they lacked any aggressive or distressed undertones. They bore a striking resemblance to vocalizations, as if the bulls were communicating with one another across considerable distances. By midday, the reports had become more precise. Bulls from the neighboring plantation, owned by a gentleman named Hutchinson, had breached their enclosure and were making their way toward Vandermeer's holdings. They were not running or stampeding, but rather walking with evident purpose, as if drawn by an irresistible compulsion. Hutchinson himself arrived at Vandermeer's gates around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, visibly incensed and bewildered. "Your man has done something to my bulls," he vociferated at the guards. "They demolished a reinforced fence and are proceeding this way. I demand an explanation for this preposterous situation." Word of Hutchinson's arrival and complaint was conveyed to Vandermeer, who appeared at the gates looking even more wretched than he had earlier that morning. When Hutchinson elaborated on the events, Vandermeer's complexion turned ashen. "How many bulls?" he inquired. "5, Hutchinson stated. "5 of my prime breeding stock. They simply departed. They traversed the fence as if it were non-existent, and they are heading toward your property, toward that pen where you have incarcerated your slave. What did he do to them?" Vandermeer had no immediate answer. He instructed his overseers to attempt to intercept the bulls and guide them back to Hutchinson's estate. However, upon locating the bulls, 5 colossal animals moving in a loose aggregation through the pine forest, the overseers were unable to divert them. The bulls disregarded the overseers' shouts and the lash of their whips. They persisted in their onward movement, their gazes fixed upon a distant point, an unseen destination perceptible only to them. By late afternoon, the 5 bulls had arrived at Vandermeer's plantation and were positioned at the gates, exhibiting a calm and patient demeanor, awaiting something. Workers attempted to approach them to escort them away, but the bulls remained resolutely in place. They simply stood there, their attention unequivocally focused on the distant bullpen where Tobias remained. And they were not alone. Throughout the afternoon and into the evening, additional bulls began to arrive. 3 from a plantation to the south, belonging to a Mr. Crawford, 4 from an estate to the west, owned by a widow identified as Mrs. Pembroke, 2 from a modest farm to the north. They originated from disparate directions and diverse properties, yet their convergence point was invariably the same, outside Vandermeer's gates, where they patiently waited. By nightfall, 14 bulls from neighboring properties had assembled. They stood in a relaxed formation, exhibiting no animosity toward one another, no aggression whatsoever, simply waiting. And every single one of these animals was oriented in the same direction, toward the pen where Tobias sat, encircled by Vandermeer's original complement of 6 bulls. The proprietors of the farms from which these bulls had absconded were incensed. They converged upon Vandermeer's property, demanding explanations, seeking restitution, and insisting that he take action to secure the return of their livestock. However, Vandermeer was utterly bereft of explanations. He stood on his veranda, his gaze fixed upon the assembled bulls, his face a tableau of profound confusion and palpable dread. "I do not comprehend," he repeatedly stated. "I have no understanding of how this is occurring." The other plantation owners remained unconvinced. They accused him of employing some form of enticement, some clandestine method to lure their bulls away. Disputes erupted and threats were exchanged. The established social hierarchy, which had appeared so unshakable mere days prior, was beginning to fragment. At the epicenter of this unraveling stood a single individual seated within a pen alongside 6 bulls, engaged in nothing more than his own existence. That night, Vandermeer experienced no sleep. He paced his study relentlessly, imbibing brandy, his gaze frequently drawn to the distant pen visible through the window. The household staff reported hearing him conversing with himself once more, his voice fluctuating, at times agitated, at times despairing. Around midnight, Margaret, his wife, finally compelled her way into the study, disregarding his previous injunctions to leave him undisturbed. "Wilhelm," she stated, her tone firm, "you must cease this. Release the man. Uphold your pledge. Grant him his liberty and bring this to an end." Vandermeer turned to regard her, and she instinctively recoiled, unnerved by the expression on his face. "Let him go," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Let him go. Do you not grasp the magnitude of what is unfolding? He is appropriating them. He is commandeering my bulls. He is absconding with bulls from other men's properties. He is accomplishing that which is deemed impossible. And if I release him, if I acknowledge his extraordinary nature, then everyone will realize, everyone will know that a slave has bested me, that I was rendered powerless against him." "This transcends mere power, Margaretti," she implored. "This pertains to survival, your very survival. Can you not perceive the detrimental effect this is having upon you?" But Werner was no longer attentive. He turned back toward the window, his gaze fixed upon the enveloping darkness, and Margaret departed, leaving him alone with his consuming obsession. The third day concluded at dawn on the fourth day, precisely 72 hours subsequent to Tobias's confinement within the pen. Vandermeer had issued directives that the gate be opened at the first light of day, and a considerable concourse of individuals had gathered to witness the event. Among the assembled were the enslaved laborers, the overseers, several of the neighboring plantation owners whose bulls had vanished, and even a few townspeople drawn by the circulating stories, who had journeyed to observe the culmination. Vernier stood at the forefront of the assembly, flanked by Dalton and 4 armed overseers. He had commanded them to be prepared for any eventuality. Should the bulls charge upon the gate's opening, they were to open fire. Should Tobias attempt an escape, they were to apprehend him. Vernier's countenance was pallid and etched with fatigue, his eyes bloodshot from protracted sleeplessness, his hands exhibiting a slight tremor. As the sun ascended, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, Dalton advanced and commenced the unlocking of the gate. The metallic clatter of the chains being disengaged resonated loudly in the morning stillness. The crowd collectively held its breath. The gate creaked open. For a fleeting moment, there was absolute stillness. Then Tobias slowly rose, brushing residual mud from his garments. The 6 bulls, with surprising grace, unfolded their massive bodies and ascended with him, moving in perfect synchronicity. Tobias surveyed the open gateway, then the bulls, and finally the assembly of onlookers. He proceeded toward the gate, his movements calm and measured. The bulls followed, not with aggression or haste, but with an unhurried pace. They simply advanced behind him, their heads bowed, their eyes fixed upon his retreating form. They passed through the gate in single file, Goliath leading the procession, followed by the others, and then arranged themselves in a loose semicircle behind Tobias. The crowd instinctively receded, creating a wide, unobstructed passage. A profound silence enveloped the scene. No one spoke, no one stirred. They merely observed as Tobias emerged from the pen and stepped into the morning's gentle light, accompanied by 6 formidable bulls, moving as if they were mere obedient hounds. Tobias halted a few paces from Vandermeer. The 2 men met each other's gaze, and for an extended period neither uttered a word. Tobias's expression was inscrutable, not indicative of anger, triumph, or fear, but rather a profound knowing, as if he had apprehended something that Vandermeer would forever remain oblivious to, something fundamental regarding the nature of power and dominion and the true essence of connection with another living entity. Vandermeer broke eye contact first, sharply averting his head. "Remove him from my property," he muttered to Dalton. "Immediately." But before any action could be taken, a sound, a deep, resonant bellowing, emanated from the direction of the gates. The 14 bulls that had congregated from neighboring properties were vocalizing, their calls echoing across the plantation, and then they began to advance. They proceeded through the open gates past the bewildered guards, past the assembled onlookers, moving directly toward Tobias. Upon reaching him, they halted, forming a more expansive circle around him and the original 6 bulls, resulting in a total of 20 bulls, all standing placidly, all focused upon a single man. The crowd erupted in hushed exclamations and gasps of astonishment. The neighboring plantation owners, who had arrived with the intention of reclaiming their animals, stared in utter disbelief. This was beyond comprehension. Bulls did not behave in such a manner. They did not congregate in such formations, nor did they follow a human being with such apparent volition. They certainly did not exhibit this level of synchronized behavior. Vandermeer recoiled slightly, his face a mask of stark pallor. "Stop him," he implored weakly. "Do not permit him to depart with those animals. They are not his property. They belong to me, to Hutchinson, to Crawford, to—" "They belong to themselves," Tobias interjected quietly, speaking for the first time since exiting the pen. His voice, though calm, carried distinctly to every corner of the assembly. "They always have. You simply never grasped that." Vandermeer's face contorted with renewed fury. "You are a slave. You possess nothing. You are nothing. Those bulls are property, just as you are." Tobias regarded him with an expression that could be interpreted as pity. "I was property," he stated. "You pledged my freedom if I endured 3 days. I have endured. Therefore, I am now free, and these bulls," he gestured toward the animals encircling him, "have made their choice." "Shoot him!" Vandermeer suddenly commanded, turning to the armed overseers. "Shoot him and scatter those bulls!" However, none of the overseers moved. They exchanged nervous glances, but no one raised their weapon. The sight of 20 colossal bulls standing in perfect serenity around a single man was too extraordinary, too profoundly unsettling. It felt inherently wrong to intervene, as though doing so would violate some natural law they could not fathom. Dalton stepped forward, his voice low and measured. "Sir, you made a promise in the presence of witnesses. If we now renege on that promise, your word will hold no value. Every man present will know that you are untrustworthy." Vandermeer surveyed the crowd, the neighboring plantation owners observing him, his own workers who had borne witness to his vow. He found himself ensnared. If he honored his word, he would lose face by allowing a slave to best him. If he broke his word, he would forfeit credibility by revealing himself as untrustworthy. There was no viable recourse that would not undermine his reputation and authority. Finally, his shoulders slumped in resignation. "Very well," he conceded, his voice barely audible. "Take your freedom. Take the $50 and depart my property. I wish never to see you again." Tobias nodded slowly. "I will require the money in written form, a document stipulating my freedom signed by you and witnessed by these gentlemen. Otherwise, I will be apprehended as an escapee the moment I depart." Vandermeer's jaw tightened, but he recognized the validity of Tobias's assertion. He turned to Dalton. "Prepare the necessary documents and disperse his funds." It took nearly an hour to finalize all the arrangements. Vandermeer's personal secretary was summoned to draft a formal instrument of manumission, declaring that Tobias was thereby irrevocably freed from the bonds of slavery and awarded $50 as compensation for services rendered. Vandermeer affixed his signature with a trembling hand, and 3 of the neighboring plantation owners attested as witnesses, their expressions ranging from bewilderment to profound fascination. Throughout this period, Tobias stood composed, enveloped by the surrounding 20 bulls. Laborers brought him water, which he drank slowly, and some bread, which he consumed in modest portions. The bulls maintained their placidity, occasionally shifting their positions, but never venturing far from Tobias's immediate vicinity. When the documents were finally prepared, Dalton presented them to Tobias along with a small leather pouch containing $50 in coinage. Tobias accepted the papers, perused them with meticulous care, then folded them and tucked them securely inside his shirt. He took the pouch and offered a nod of gratitude. "Where will you go?" Dalton inquired quietly. He had consistently treated Tobias with a degree of respect exceeding that of the other overseers, and his question was infused with genuine curiosity. Tobias turned his gaze eastward toward the dense pine forests that stretched for miles beyond the plantation's boundaries.
"Somewhere tranquil," he replied. "Somewhere where we can exist in peace." "Oui?" Dalton inquired, glancing toward the bulls. Tobias offered a faint smile. "Yes, oui," he affirmed, and then began walking toward the road leading away from the plantation, the bulls following in his wake. They proceeded in a loose formation, some walking alongside him, others trailing behind, creating a protective cordon around him. The crowd parted to permit their passage.
Workers, overseers, and plantation owners alike stepped aside, observing in stunned silence as this improbable procession moved onward. Some of the enslaved workers extended their hands as Tobias passed, not to make contact, but as if seeking a form of benediction or confirmation that the event they were witnessing was indeed real. A few were weeping, though they could not articulate the reason. Others whispered prayers or made gestures warding off evil, uncertain whether the spectacle unfolding before them was of divine or diabolical origin. Tobias proceeded down the long dirt track that led away from the plantation, the morning sun ascending behind him, casting his shadow and the shadows of the 20 bulls in long, attenuated lines across the ground. He did not look back. He continued his steady and purposeful stride, the bulls remaining steadfast in their escort. Vandermeer observed the departure from the veranda of his main residence, his hands gripping the railing with such force that his knuckles appeared stark white. His face was contorted with an expression that blended potent rage, abject fear, and something more profound, a form of existential horror, as if he were witnessing the disintegration of his entire worldview and his established place within it. Margaret stood beside him, her hand resting upon his arm, offering what little comfort she could, but Vandermeer seemed oblivious to her presence. He remained fixated on the receding figure of Tobias and his procession of bulls until they vanished into the dense tree line and were gone from sight. In the ensuing days and weeks, the extraordinary narrative of what had transpired at Vandermeer's plantation circulated widely throughout Georgia and beyond. Newspapers eventually picked up the story, though they approached it with a degree of skepticism, suggesting that the accounts had been embellished or that a more conventional explanation had been overlooked in the initial reporting. Religious leaders engaged in debates, questioning whether Tobias had been divinely favored or diabolically influenced, academics and naturalists contributed letters to journals proposing theories concerning animal behavior and interspecies communication. However, for those who had been present and had witnessed the events firsthand, no amount of skepticism or scholarly conjecture could alter the irrefutable reality of what they had seen. Tobias had indeed survived 3 days in the company of 6 killer bulls. 20 bulls had followed him upon his departure. These were established facts corroborated by the testimony of dozens of witnesses, and no amount of rationalization could diminish their impact. The proprietors of neighboring estates, incensed by the vanishing of their prized bulls, directed their ire towards Vandermeer. They insisted on restitution for their livestock, alleging he had somehow ensnared them, or that his bondsman had employed some covert method to pilfer them. Vannier vehemently denied any culpability, asserting the animals had departed of their own volition. These disagreements festered, escalating into protracted legal battles that would consume years, deplete Vandermeer's coffers, and shatter his standing among his peers. The social repercussions proved even more devastating. Vandermeer's reputation lay in ruins. The narrative of a bondsman outsmarting him, surviving his retribution, and departing with 20 bulls in tow became a prevalent source of derision and idle chatter throughout the district. Fellow estate owners began to scrutinize his judgment, his authority, and his very competence. Invitations to social functions dwindled to nothing. Business ventures faltered. He found himself ostracized, a man who had forfeited the esteem of his contemporaries. Yet the most profound impact was psychological. Vannier became consumed by an insatiable need to comprehend the inexplicable event. He spent countless hours in his study, poring over texts on animal behavior, on African spiritual practices and folklore, on anything that might shed light on Tobias's extraordinary ability. He sought counsel from individuals he would have once dismissed as charlatans, herbalists, folk healers, itinerant preachers, claiming dominion over the supernatural. He craved answers, desperately needed them, but none were forthcoming. His conduct grew increasingly erratic. His workers reported observing him wandering the grounds at night, a lantern in hand, murmuring to himself. He would linger by the vacant bullpen for extended periods, his gaze fixed upon the earth where Tobias had once sat, as if seeking a hidden message in the soil. He abandoned regular sleep and proper sustenance, ceasing to maintain the polished veneer of composure that had defined his public persona. Margaret endeavored to comfort him, urging him to relinquish his obsession and move forward. But Vannier could not. His entire sense of self was inextricably linked to the notion of control. Control over his possessions, his laborers, his livestock, his dominion. Tobias had irrevocably shattered that illusion. If one individual could achieve what Tobias had, if the established order could be so easily disrupted, what did that signify about Vandermeer's potency? What did it betray about the entire structure upon which his life was founded? The estate's productivity plummeted dramatically. Whispers circulated among the workers that the very land had turned against Vandermeer, that crops withered in fields once renowned for their fertility. Horses grew skittish and unmanageable. Even the dogs seemed perpetually on edge, barking at unseen spectres, exhibiting an aversion to certain areas of the property. Whether these afflictions were tangible or imagined, a consequence of Vannier's waning oversight or mere misfortune, they collectively fostered a pervasive sense that a fundamental equilibrium had been irrevocably disturbed. Approximately 6 weeks after Tobias's departure, an itinerant preacher passed through Valdosta, stopping at a local tavern where he recounted an extraordinary tale to any who would lend an ear. He claimed that while traversing the remote backwoods of southern Georgia, he had encountered a solitary man dwelling in a forest clearing. This individual was encircled by bulls. The preacher estimated at least 20, living in what could only be described as profound amity. The bulls grazed peacefully, the preacher recounted, his hands trembling as he shared the account, and the man moved among them without a trace of apprehension. I attempted to approach him to offer spiritual solace, the preacher stated, his voice hushed, but the man's gaze, which seemed to pierce right through me, instilled such an overwhelming sense of dread that I turned and fled. It was unnatural. That man, there was something fundamentally wrong with him. And those bulls, they watched me as if they were his sentinels, ready to defend him with their lives, should he command it. Upon hearing this narrative, which spread with remarkable speed through the channels of gossip, Vandermeer became convinced that Tobias was practicing some form of dark sorcery deep within the woods. He began formulating plans to locate him, to confront him, to somehow reverse whatever malevolent act had been perpetrated. He spoke of organizing a search party, of offering bounties for information, of compelling Tobias to reveal his methods. However, these intentions never materialized. Vanier's mental state continued its descent. He began experiencing what he described as apparitions, envisioning bulls lurking outside his windows at night, hearing their guttural breaths, sensing their unwavering gaze, even when confined within locked chambers. His wife and household staff attempted to persuade him that these were mere phantoms, products of stress and sleep deprivation, but Vanier remained steadfast in his conviction of their reality. "He is observing me," Vanier would declare, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond his study window. "Tobias, he is out there with those bulls and he is watching me. He comprehends my thoughts. He knows my intentions. He will not grant me respite." 3 months after Tobias's disappearance, on a stifling July evening, Baron Wilhelm Vandermeer sealed himself within his study. He informed Margaret that he was not to be disturbed, that pressing business required his undivided attention. Having heard similar pronouncements before, she wisely refrained from argument and retired to her chambers, leaving the household to its customary nocturnal tranquility. The following morning, when the household staff knocked to deliver breakfast, there was no response. They knocked again, more forcefully. Still silence. Dalton was summoned. He tested the door, finding it secured from within. He called out to Vandermeer. Silence persisted. Growing apprehensive, Dalton ordered the door to be forcibly opened. It required the concerted effort of 3 men wielding a heavy beam to finally splinter the lock and breach the portal. What they discovered within would forever haunt their memories. Baron Wilhelm Vandermeer was seated at his desk, slumped forward, his head resting upon his arms. Initially, they presumed he had merely fallen asleep. However, upon approaching and touching his shoulder, Dalton found the body cold and rigid. Vanier had been deceased for several hours. There were no indications of any struggle, no injuries, no spilled blood, no evidence of poison or conflict. The chamber was precisely as it always was. Books lined the shelves, papers were arranged on the desk, and a half-empty glass of brandy sat nearby. The windows were latched from the interior, and the door had been bolted from the inside, rendering any ingress or egress impossible. Yet it was Vandermeer's countenance that most profoundly disturbed them. His eyes were wide open, fixed upon an unseen spectacle. His mouth was frozen in a silent scream. His hands were so tightly clenched that his fingernails had drawn blood from his palms. Every facial muscle was contorted in an expression of absolute, unmitigated terror. The physician who examined the remains could ascertain no specific cause of death. His heart had simply ceased to function. "It is as if," the doctor stated, his words carefully chosen, "he was literally frightened to death."
As if he witnessed something so horrifying that his heart could not endure the shock. Beneath Vandermeer's arm, resting on the desk, lay a piece of paper. It was covered in frantic, almost illegible script, the words scrawled with desperate haste. Dalton retrieved it and read it aloud to the assembled onlookers. "They are here, all of them, positioned outside the window. 20 bulls simply standing, watching, waiting. He is with them, Tobias. He stands in the very center, and he is gazing at me."
He sees through the window, through the walls, through everything. He perceives me. He knows, they all know they are not moving, merely observing, merely anticipating. I can hear their breathing. I can hear their heartbeats. I can hear his heartbeat. It sounds like thunder. It sounds like the very earth. They are not departing. They will never depart. They will remain there eternally, watching, waiting until I... The inscription terminated abruptly, the pen trailing off the page as if Vandermeer's hand had ceased functioning mid-sentence. Dalton immediately dispatched men to investigate the ground surrounding the study windows. They discovered nothing, no hoofprints, no tracks, no evidence of any animals having been present. The grass was undisturbed, the earth was dry and hardened from weeks of minimal rainfall. While no physical evidence supported Vandermeer's written account, 7 laborers, acting independently and without consultation, came forward in the ensuing days to report hearing an unusual sound on the night of Vandermeer's demise. Around midnight, they claimed to have heard what sounded like distant bellowing, the deep, resonant calls of bulls. Yet, upon peering outside, they observed nothing. The sound seemed to emanate from every direction and from no specific location simultaneously, echoing across the estate like a summons or a condemnation. One worker, an elderly woman named Ruth, who had served as the estate's cook, offered an observation that would resonate for years to come. That sound, she recounted, it was not imbued with anger, it held no menace. It simply existed as if the bulls were conveying a message. We remember. We are aware of your transgressions and we are watching. That is how it felt to me, like a reminder that certain events cannot be erased from memory, regardless of how fervently one wishes to forget them. Baron Wilhelm Vannier was interred within the family plot on the estate grounds. The funeral was a somber and awkward affair. Few of the neighboring estate owners were in attendance, and those who came departed swiftly, clearly unsettled by the hushed whispers and prevailing rumors surrounding Vannier's demise. The cleric who officiated the service kept his remarks brief and perfunctory, deliberately avoiding any allusion to the circumstances of Vandermeer's final months. Within 6 months, Margaretha Vanmeer divested herself of the estate. She found it unbearable to remain, unable to sleep in the house where her husband had met such a disturbing end. She returned to the Netherlands with the remaining fragments of the family fortune significantly diminished by legal expenses and declining profitability. She never remarried and never publicly discussed her husband's passing. When queried by family members, she would offer only that he had lost his way. He had become consumed by an enigma he could not decipher, and it had ultimately destroyed him. The estate changed hands 3 times over the subsequent decade. Each successive proprietor reported a series of peculiar difficulties: crop failures, livestock succumbing to mysterious ailments, laborers refusing to remain after dusk, and an overarching atmosphere of disquiet that permeated the property. The principal residence, once a symbol of grandeur and authority, gradually succumbed to dilapidation. The fields reverted to a wild state. The labourers' quarters were abandoned. Ultimately, the property was sold for a mere fraction of its original valuation to a lumber enterprise, which proceeded to clear-cut the forests, leaving the land barren. By the 1870s, all that remained of Vandermeer's estate were a few crumbling foundation stones and the family burial plot where the Baron was laid to rest. Even this eventually vanished. Obscured by encroaching vegetation, its headstones toppled and fractured, their inscriptions worn away by the relentless passage of weather and time. As for Tobias, he was never seen again, at least not by anyone whose testimony could be considered reliable. However, accounts persisted, passed down through successive generations. Each iteration varied slightly, yet all retained certain consistent elements. Travelers venturing through the dense woodlands of southern Georgia would occasionally report encountering a man living in concert with bulls in remote clearings. The descriptions diverged. Some depicted him as youthful. Others described him as elderly. Some identified him as black. Others suggested his skin had acquired a peculiar weathered texture that rendered his racial identity indeterminate. Yet, certain details remained constant. The man was invariably serene, perpetually silent, and the bulls that encircled him were always tranquil, exhibiting an almost reverent demeanor in his presence. Some posited that he had forged a life in the wilderness, liberated from the confines of estates and servitude, existing in harmony with creatures that others feared. Others contended he was a spectral entity, a spirit that had never truly departed the mortal realm, condemned to roam with his peculiar companions for all eternity. A select few whispered that he had transcended his humanity, that his time within the bullpen had transformed him into a sort of protective spirit for all animals subjected to human cruelty. One particular account, meticulously recorded in a journal kept by a surveyor named Thomas Whitley in 1851, stands out amongst the others. Whitley was engaged in mapping an uncharted region of the remote hinterland when he stumbled upon a clearing that he described as unnaturally pristine. It was a circular expanse of grass encircled by dense forest, as if the trees themselves had deliberately abstained from encroaching upon that particular space. In the heart of the clearing, he observed a man seated cross-legged upon the ground, surrounded by bulls. Whitley counted 23 of them. The man's head lifted as Whitley approached, and Whitley documented that he experienced an overwhelming impulse to cease his advance, to proceed no further. His eyes, Whitley wrote, did not reflect the countenance of a man who had endured suffering. Instead, they bore the gaze of an individual who had completely transcended suffering, who had discovered something profound beyond its grasp. "I cannot articulate what I felt in that precise moment," Whitley penned, "only that I understood, without the need for verbal communication, that I was not welcome, not due to any ill will on his part, but rather because I did not belong within that sacred space. It was his domain, and I was merely a transient observer. The bulls regarded me with the same placid attentiveness, and I knew with absolute certainty that if I took even one more step forward, they would halt my progress. Not necessarily with aggression, but they would prevent me from proceeding." Consequently, he turned and departed. Whitley never revisited that particular clearing, and years later, when he attempted to locate it again using his own meticulously drawn maps, he was unable to do so. The clearing, he concluded, had either never truly existed or had ceased to exist the very instant he had left its confines. The saga of Tobias and the 20 bulls evolved into a legend within southern Georgia, perpetuated through successive generations. It was recounted in varied forms, depending entirely on the narrator and the audience. To the enslaved population and their descendants, it became a narrative of defiance and transcendence, a testament that even under the most dire circumstances, avenues existed to preserve one's dignity and assert one's power. Among white Southerners, it transformed into a cautionary tale, illustrating the perils of underestimating those they deemed inferior, or a spectral anecdote designed to instill fear in children. Yet, a universal consensus prevailed on one crucial point. Whatever Tobias had accomplished within that bullpen, whatever profound understanding he had forged with those animals, it was an event that defied any rational explanation. The witnesses were numerous and their credibility unimpeachable. The occurrences were formally documented. Baron Vannereer's demise was officially recorded in the county archives. The disappearance of the bulls was corroborated by multiple property owners. These events transpired, they were undeniable realities. However, the underlying mechanism, the motive, the ultimate truth behind it all remains obscured, locked away within the same profound silence that Tobias carried with him into the untamed wilderness. A silence that 20 bulls comprehended but which no human being could ever fully grasp. Ultimately, we are left with questions that elude definitive answers. Did Tobias possess an innate gift from birth? Or did he acquire some profound insight during his years of hardship that remained beyond the comprehension of others? Were the bulls drawn to him by primal instinct, or by something more profound, a recognition of kinship, a shared understanding between beings who had both experienced subjugation and confinement? And what precisely did Baron Vandermeer witness in his final moments before his heart gave out? Was it truly Tobias and his entourage of 20 bulls standing sentinel outside his window? Or was it something else entirely? Perhaps guilt? Perhaps fear? The crushing weight of his own cruelty manifesting as an inescapable apparition? Was it a hallucination born of excessive stress and relentless obsession, or was it something more significant? Something that suggested the world operates on principles far stranger and more interconnected than we commonly perceive, that acts of cruelty and suffering leave indelible marks that cannot be erased, that certain debts are inevitably exacted? We shall never know with absolute certainty. The estate has long since vanished, reclaimed by the embrace of the forest and the relentless march of time. The individuals who bore witness to these extraordinary events are now long deceased. And Tobias, wherever his path may have led him, carried his secrets with him. Yet, even now occasionally, travelers traversing the remote backwoods of southern Georgia report hearing an unusual sound in the nocturnal stillness. A sound akin to distant bellowing, deep and resonant, echoing through the dense canopy of trees. And at times, in clearings where no human habitation has existed for over a century, they discover circles of flattened grass, as if large animals had rested there. But there are no tracks, no discernible signs indicating their arrival or departure, only empty clearings, and a lingering sensation that something inexplicable transpired there at some point. Something that, however fleetingly, altered the very fabric of reality, something that served as a stark reminder that the world is more enigmatic and profound than we can ever fully comprehend. And perhaps herein lies the true source of terror. Not the manifestation of monsters, ghosts, or supernatural entities, but rather the unsettling possibility that reality itself contains fissures, places where the established rules cease to apply. Moments when an individual can stride into an enclosure populated by 6 formidable bulls and emerge 3 days later with 20 of them trailing in his wake like shadows. Moments when the impossible assumes a terrifyingly tangible form. Moments that compel us to re-examine every preconceived notion we hold regarding power, dominion, the very essence of consciousness and connection, and the true meaning of comprehending another living being. The narrative of Tobias and the 20 bulls represents one such moment. It occurred. The evidence is palpable. Yet the explanation remains perpetually out of reach, much like a word on the very tip of one's tongue that persistently eludes retrieval. And perhaps this is how it is meant to be. Perhaps some mysteries are not intended for resolution. Perhaps their purpose is to serve as perpetual reminders that despite our unwavering certainty, our reliance on science, logic, and rational explanations, there remain aspects of this world that elude our understanding, events that occurred, that were witnessed and meticulously documented, yet stubbornly refuse to conform to our predetermined categories and explanations. Matters that provoke introspection late at night when we find ourselves alone with our thoughts. They prompt us to question whether the world is as solid and predictable as we prefer to believe, or if there are indeed cracks in its foundation, allowing entry to something else, something ancient, something primal, something governed by rules we have either forgotten or never knew. The story of Tobias represents one such fissure, and it remains open even now, well over a century and a half later. A question devoid of an answer, a mystery without a solution. A poignant reminder that some occurrences once witnessed defy all attempts at rationalization. What are your thoughts on this account? Do you believe Tobias possessed a genuine, inherent gift? Or was there a rational explanation that eluded discovery? Could Vanir's demise have been solely attributable to guilt and fear, or was some other force at play? Share your perspectives in the comments section below. And if you found this in-depth exploration of one of history's most unsettling enigmas to be engaging, please consider subscribing to the channel and activating the notification bell to ensure you never miss another compelling story. Until our next encounter, remember that the past is replete with mysteries, and some of them steadfastly refuse to remain buried.